Now, deloading seems to be a staple in most powerlifting programs, but some people think that they are overused or quick to be implemented. So the question is, how important are deloads and how often should it be done? Now, in this video, I will go through everything that you need to know about deloads, how often it should be done, and also how much you should be deloading by. If you're new here, my name is Norman Chang, and in over a decade of coaching powerlifting, I have coached all levels of powerlifters, including various international competitors. So let's clarify the concept of deloading. What is deloading? Now, deloading is fundamentally a fatigue management and injury prevention tool. Now, whenever we impose a training stimulus on ourselves, we simultaneously get strength adaptations and physiological effects that mask our performance, i.e. fatigue. Now, depending on the size of the stimulants and recovery resources, our performance can do one of three things: improve, stay stagnant, or decrease. Now, if we visualize a dose-response relationship between what we do on the x-axis, the gains that we get on the y-axis, and we have a baseline level of performance here on the x-axis as well, we can visualize a rough bell curve. And it is when the training that we do is at this point, i.e. the maximal recoverable dose, which is the most amount of training that you can do, that you can just recover back to baseline. Or if you do train beyond this point, by definition, you cannot recover back to where you were before. In this situation, this is no longer a useful point to be at because there is too much excess fatigue being built up. This is also problematic because the risk of overuse injuries are going to be greater here, and the need for deloads is going to be severe. So if you hit a point where your performance is constantly being flatlined or reducing, you have reached a point of adaptive resistance, i.e. where you can no longer create positive adaptations, which is ultimately what we want to become stronger. So deloading is a tool to help resensitize you to create more adaptations. So how can you tell if your performance is actually decreasing? Now, if you have misconceptions of overload and fatigue, it's very easy not to interpret when your performance is actually decreasing. Now, some people think that by lifting heavier weights week after week, they interpret themselves to still be increasing in performance and strength just by lifting at that intensity. But actually, how hard those heavier weights are matters a lot. Estimated 1 rep max is a very popular metric to help coaches track top-end performance. So when you pitch the RPE against the reps and the weights done, you can then estimate your 1 rep max. And it's watching this trend in estimated 1 rep max from session to session, week to week, is when you can figure out whether you're able to create positive adaptations in performance. Here's a worked out example. Let's say you did 200 for a single, but it was RP6 in the first week. But the week after, you did 202.5 for a single, but it was RP9 or 10. Now, when you extract your estimated 1 rep max for the first week, you're likely going to get a higher estimated 1 rep max than the second week. Therefore, a downward trend in performance from the previous week, even though you technically performed a higher load on the second week. Now, if after a few weeks of hard training, your estimated 1 rep max starts to trend downwards, this is probably when you need to actually deload. In another situation, as well as deloading after a downward trend in performance, you may also want to deload when your performance is trending sideways. So the question is, how do you deload? Now, to deload, you need to be adjusting the variables. The two main variables that you need to reduce are either intensity or volume, or a combination of both. So from my personal experience, most people will benefit from a reduction in intensity, but some people may need a reduction in both volume and intensity. So how much should you be deloading by? Now, this obviously depends. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to profile each training week with respect to where you think that training week is on the dose response curve. So you may want to consider profiling each training week with respect to whether it's near the maintenance dose, the minimum effective dose, the maximal adaptive dose, and the maximal recoverable dose, or anywhere in between. But how can you tell where each training week or microcycle is on this dose response curve? Well, if you can conceptualize the fact that performance of subsequent training sessions and training weeks are due to the stimulus from the previous sessions and previous weeks, you can roughly use that to figure out where each training week is with regards to the dose response curve. And depending on how fatigued that you actually are, you ideally want to deload to anywhere between this point, the maintenance dose, and a minimum effective dose. Unless you are actually injured, you ideally do not want to deload below the level of the maintenance dose, because by definition, you will probably actually detrain. When should you deload? Now, this is a good question, and the answer is not just simply when you get fatigued or when your top end performance or estimated 1 rep max goes down, because you can easily prematurely deload. The fact is, when we program a lifter, we are programming while being partially blind to the future. And sometimes athletes may be in situations where there are spikes in external stresses, and this may temporarily reduce your performance. But events like those can be transient in nature. meaning that it is very short and temporary. So you do not necessarily need to reduce training to deload straight away, because the fatigue coming from training is still recoverable from week to week. Whilst monitoring various aspects of the program, if you are sure that it's obvious that there is a systematic fatigue from the training, then you should consider deloading. An example of several things that you may see: when your top end performance is going down, your work capacity in your sets is going down, i.e. your RPE is aggressively climbing up across straight sets, your accessory performance is going down, and the performance across all of the lifts are going down. If you are spotting a large number of these, then it may be time to deload. So how often should you deload? In short, as often as you need to, not more, not less. Now, if you are running a new training program, a rule of thumb is to deload when you've got 2 weeks of back-to-back reduction in performance. So however long that program was leading up to that 2-week drop in performance is when you need to deload. Now, this is actually called reactive deloading. But if you were to run the same program again, what I would suggest you do is to deload 2 weeks earlier than you actually need to, by taking into consideration of the previous training block's performance, because you can anticipate the crashing of performance due to excessive fatigue. Now, this is called proactive deloading. So however long the training block was, the second time you ran the program is how frequently you should ideally need to deload. Alternatively, if you do find that the program ends up being incredibly short, such as 3 weeks or less, what you can do instead is to manipulate the training variables so that you end up spending more time in the training block, being able to create positive adaptations from week to week. The reason why it might not be ideal to train with a 3-week or less training block before deloading is because if you superimpose externals on top of that, you can get quite inconsistent progress in performance if you have less than an optimal week, and the training progress can look chaotic and largely unpredictable. So I hope you guys found this useful. If you like this source of content, please click like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.